Thank you for coming today. It's nice to see so many smiling faces in the audience. My name is Dave Doc Quack Rinchie, certified wildlife biologist for the East Bay Parks. I'm really excited to share with you today the first occurrence of the black oystercatcher nesting successfully in association with three special status species: the California least tern, the western snowy plover, and of course the black skimmer. I'll share with you a little bit of data work that we came up with. The oystercatcher is not an oystercatcher, and certainly this information on the breeding of the oystercatcher will support the recovery plans and tasks consistent with managing habitat for the endangered California least tern and the threatened western snowy plover. I'd like to say a few words about my co-authors. Ben Pearl is a wildlife biologist and plover tern director for the San Francisco Bay Bird Observatory during the study when this began. He's worked there since 2013. He's spent many years studying the western snowy plover throughout the San Francisco Bay region. Today, he's currently employed as a senior ecologist with H.T. Harvey. Susan Ramos was acting wildlife biologist for us during the time that this study began in 2020. She's worked as a naturalist for over 20 years. She's a fine interpreter, great professional, and she's a recipient of the East Bay Regional Park District's Conservation Award for the California least tern. The wildlife volunteers are really the backbone of our program. More than 7,000 volunteers have participated in this project, and they've contributed almost 41,000 hours of volunteer service. This group has made and worked very hard to make this the second largest tern colony in the northern part of the state's range, and it has one of the highest densities of western snowy plovers in the recovery unit. Many hearts and hands played a big role in this. I want to thank our funders and collaborators. Greater than 16 different groups from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife all the way down to Wildlife Innovations have played a role in making this such a successful site. Now, a few words about the black oystercatcher. This is a species of special concern, and you might say, wow, it's a black bird with a funny red bill, and it's actually about the size of a raven or crow, and I'll speak more about that. The black oystercatcher is actually a shorebird with this bright chisel shaped bill that it uses to extract mussels and clams. It has been declared a species of special concern in the U.S. and Canada and Mexico, due to the small population size. Roughly 12,000 individuals remain. They have a very low reproductive rate, and they're completely dependent on the rocky intertidal. This species is particularly vulnerable to disturbance by predators and oil spills. The black oystercatcher is an uncommon species along the west coast of North America, and it's limited to the rocky intertidal. Of the 6 species of birds that rely on our rocky coast, this is the only one that actually spends the habitat in the habitat year-round. The other 5, the ruddy turnstone, the black turnstone, the wandering tattler, the rock sandpiper, and the surfbird, are only there for a portion of the year, typically in the winter. So the oystercatcher is really a barometer of health of our rocky intertidal. As I've mentioned, it's completely dependent on the rocky intertidal, and human impact by sea level rise is certainly a problem in climate change. The bird forages on mussels and varieties of mussels that are in dense groups. Mussels are typically taken with the bill. When the wave wash is hitting the rocks, the mussels tend to open up, or clams, and that's when their surgic-like stab of the oystercatcher's bill separates the abductor mussels, and they then consume them. So once again, oystercatchers don't eat mussels. They don't eat oysters. They don't eat oysters. They eat clams. So nesting habitat for this bird is typically on sand or gravel beaches on rocky headlands. They like to have a low sloping nesting site, which you'll see when I show you the island, and as well as for feeding. Black oystercatchers are known to nest near gulls and terns, specifically the Arctic tern, and occasionally less than 3 meters away or 9 feet, and they are known to use their bill to jab at young terns or gulls that wander too close. Hence the reason for the research of this project. We also know that paired members that are long-term pair bonds will use the same nesting site in consecutive breeding seasons and may stay together for many, many years. Now a little bit about what I call the angel tern. It's the smallest tern in North America. It's a beautiful and lovely California least tern. This bird was officially listed as an endangered species in 1970, one of the original 20, and it's a state endangered species fully protected in 1971. The California least tern is a migratory bird along our Pacific coast in lagoons and bays, and it goes all the way from Baja California all the way up to the San Francisco Bay. Then, of course, we've got this beautiful, lovely beach-loving bird as a threatened species with the brown back and the incomplete black breastband and dark bill. This, of course, is our friend, the western snowy plover. The western snowy plover is federally threatened species in 2012, and of course, it's a California species of special concern in 2019. The Pacific Coast population of this bird ranges all the way from Washington all the way down to Baja California. And they do occur in several locations on our wintering beaches at Crown Beach. Now the next bird I just truly love. This bird with you can look at the bill. You've got a short bill on the top. A lower mandible extends way out. These black oystercatchers are a species of special concern. They forage on small fish, mainly at night or low light levels, and they drag that lower bill through the water. They're very graceful in the air, slow, long wing beats. It's poetry in motion. They breed along our coast of San Francisco Bay, down to San Diego Bay and into the Salton Sea. So what we have is really the northernmost breeding population of this bird. And their greatest threat is really the loss of suitable nesting habitat that can be a result of continued loss as a result of erosion or vegetation outgrowing on small islands. So what's the objectives of this study? Well, we want to support the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service recovery plans for both the California least tern and western snowy plover by monitoring and managing breeding habitat. And certainly within those goals is undertaking scientific studies that really facilitate the recovery and provide information that will help these listed species survive and recover. And then lastly, we're trying to document the nesting activities of this new player in the game, the black oystercatcher, near 3 special status species, the terns, the western snowy plover, and the black skimmer, and identify any special site protection plans that might be needed to assist with these species. So this is our study location. Lease stands for Least Tern Colony, and Alameda is the largest colony, and then certainly our colony, the Hayward colony, is known as Turntown, and this is the second largest breeding least tern colony in the northern part of the species range north of Ventura County, and has one of the highest densities of nesting sites. And of course, this is managed by the East Bay Regional Park District. This island location was built by volunteers, and this area is completely off limits to the public. So I just want to say a little bit about the statewide significance of this site for the California least tern, western snowy plover, and black skimmer, and why we're looking at this. So the California least tern started nesting at this location in 2005, and since that date, 1,400 nests have been produced, and we've resulted in 1,435 fledglings. So we're averaging a little more than 1 fledgling per pair. And this is quite substantial when the state average is around 1 fledgling per 5 pairs. And of course, we have the western snowy plover nesting on this site, and they started nesting in 2008. Since that date, we've had 56 nests, 78 fledglings, and here again, we're over 1 fledgling per adult male per pair, when the averages is around 0.33 fledglings per adult. And of course, the graceful black skimmer, the third player in this game, started nesting in this site in 2015. Since that date, we've had 69 nests, and once again, 97 fledglings, well over the 1 fledgling per pair ratio. So quite a significant site for all three species. So what are the methods? What were the methods that we're looking at? We want to look at the reproductive success, certainly of all three birds, listed birds, and also the reproductive success and nesting chronology, the timing, the size of eggs, and the success. And this was all done doing a type 1 survey where you're actually walking in the colony. And the publication that I'll allude to at the end, you could read more about that. We looked at black oystercatcher data by collecting and identifying and measuring the types of bivalves, the clams, as you can see in this picture, and mussels that were brought back to the nest site. And that was used to help us determine the type of prey that was being fed to their offspring. So in short, this area is a very magical and amazing place with three special status birds. So for some results, you can see we have two eggs here next to a tile, next to a spoon. And in 2022, June of 2022, at Turntown, the oystercatchers showed up and they started to lay eggs well after the least terns started to nest. And you can see here from this map on your left, all the pink marks are tern nests. The blue knot that's now in a round circle is where the oystercatchers were nesting on the eastern side of the island, low sloping edge. And we saw no incident of a black oystercatcher jabbing a tern or plover or skimmer chick that wandered too close. Now I want to show you a little bit about the nesting and the chronology of the nest. California least terns are your orange hexagon in the top. The black oystercatchers are your round circle. The snowy plovers are your green triangle. And of course, the beautiful oystercatcher is a purple square. So as you can see, as this is loading, terns showed up first, and then a whole bunch of terns and plovers. And after about June, towards the end of June, now our oystercatcher is showing up. So once again, the terns were not impacted, the plovers weren't impacted, the skimmers weren't impacted by the oystercatchers showing up. And then according to, like the literature would suggest, the black oystercatchers returned in 2023, but this time they returned really early, and this time they laid 3 eggs, pretty much in the same exact location. So by the end of May, we had 3 eggs at Turntown, and this one ultimately produced 1 fledgling. Here's a map again. Last year we had 144 California least terns, so you see a whole lot of purple on that map. And in the center, you'll see there again is the oystercatcher, pretty much in the same spot. And once again, we saw no evidence of oystercatchers jabbing their bills at terns or plovers that wandered too close. So I want to go to the next slide here. And once again, here we're looking at Turntown from above. Same species, the least tern with the orange hexagon, the black skimmer with the black circle, the lovely snowy plover with the green triangle, and the oystercatcher. And this time you'll see the oystercatcher shows up. It's pretty much the first bird on the island, followed by skimmers. Then the terns start showing up, and once the terns start going, then the snowy plovers show up. That's a whole nother study. Our plovers show up after the least terns get busy. So once again, the 3 listed species were not affected by the nesting of the oystercatcher. Now let's look at what the oystercatcher was eating. You can see this was something Susan worked diligently on, the clams and mussels, limpets, and you can see the top player was the Japanese little neck clam. So the data showed that the percentage of prey that were fed to the offspring were pretty much Japanese little nut clams. And you can see the average size is 0.33 millimeters. And what I forgot to say is 25 millimeters is about an inch. So they're foraging on things that are running from 1 inch to 2 inches in size. And you can see in this picture below here, this is where they're processing all the mussels and clams. You can see all the cracked oyster shells where they've broken into them, excuse me, mussel shells that they've broken into, opened up and fed the flesh to their offspring. So here we have Papa oystercatcher walking with a juvenile And one of the things that we wanted to look at is that oyster catchers were bringing these whole mussels back to the Tern Island. There was no mussels growing. There's no clams growing around Turntown. So these birds, oyster catchers, are flying out to the breakwater anywhere from 300 to over 700 meters away to catch food to feed their young. So you can see an egg here next to the tile, and now you can see the little baby hiding underneath the tern chick shelter. So the only sort of disturbance we ever saw by the oyster catchers was when the oyster catchers left the island and flew out to get a mussel or clam and bring it back. And it's pretty much thought that it was really just that they're a blackbird. So here you can see Turntown, and the orange dot is the flight of the oyster catcher, and you're going to see it fly all the way out to the San Francisco Bay Trail, where we have a number of rock outcrops where there's clams and mussels for them to forage on. So here we go. This is a flight of the oyster catcher. Flies all the way out, grabs a mussel, flies all the way back, and processes it to it and feeds its young. So once again, the only effect that we saw was that when the oyster catchers were leaving the island and coming back, did the terns put up a distraction display. So a little bit about the oyster catchers. We know that they're fairly common resident along our Pacific coastline, but they're really only known to breed in a few locations in Alameda and Contra Costa County. And it's really thought that there's some evidence of range expansion that's going on in British Columbia and in the San Francisco Bay. And this may have something to do with climate change and sea level rise, all driving that. And we see a lot more in our publication on that topic. It's been hypothesized that the European oyster catcher will return, or will tend to return in close proximity to an area where they were raised at. And it's really thought that the black oyster catcher may be doing that as well. We say a little bit more about that in our publication as well, because there was a pair that was out at Eden Landing for a period of time that were successful. And then we started having a pair at Turntown. As I said at the beginning, paired members are known to use the same nest site for many consecutive years and may remain together for year after year. In California, more than 90% of the oyster catcher foraging habitat is area that's covered by waves. I think I've talked about this already. Parents will detach whole mussels and clams from the surf zone, bring them back to feed their young. And certainly the percentage of young being fed at this site was composed predominantly of the Japanese little nut clam and then the rib mussel and blunt nose clam. So in closing, I want you to look closely at this photograph. You've got a family of oyster catchers with a teenage-sized oyster catcher. And look to the left-hand side of your screen, there's a secret bird that's brooding a couple young. So while black oyster catchers are known to nest near gulls and terns, occasionally less than 9 feet away, this is the first documented occurrence anywhere within an active California least tern colony of western snowy plover where they have nested and nested successfully. Also, we know that they're known to use their bills to jab at gulls and terns, and this certainly could cause a problem for any of the 3 listed species we talked about. And we witnessed none of that. And as you can see here in the red circle, there's Dad, western snowy plover, brooding 2 young under each side of its wing, and nothing's happening. They're just all getting along quite nicely. So in closing, this information on breeding oyster catchers near California least terns and western snowy plovers and black skimmers will assist in developing management plans that aid in the recovery of these special status species in the face of climate change and sea level rise. And as I mentioned, there's a paper on this topic. I'll be happy to share that with you. You can just e-quack me. There's my email at the end, and there is a lovely oyster catcher living in a world of sea level rise and climate change. And now I'll take questions. Thank you.